special. In producing this 3-hour radio special to celebrate 60 years of broadcasting on the station, it was a pleasant necessity to speak to as many people as possible who were associated with 3DB over the years. If I had to choose 2 of the memories that I take away with me, they'd undoubtedly be, 1, that DB built its reputation as a family station, and secondly, everyone, without exception, paid special tribute to this man.
Good evening, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to have this little chat with you on the eve of this, our greatest race. The statement that it is possible to back a horse to win more money in the Melbourne Cup than in any other race in the world remains as true today as it was when said by Mr. Sol Green nearly 20 years ago. But it is not only because of this that the Melbourne Cup maintains its place as one of the premier racing attractions in the world. It is because it has become a national institution in Australia and will remain so come what may.
That was the voice, the magnificent voice of Eric Welsh. It's Eric who stands out in everyone's memory as a very special talent and a most important ingredient in the 3DB success story. Eric Welsh was born in Clifton Hill. He went to school at the Gold Street State School, and with no disrespect to Bill Collins, Bert Bryant and Brian Martin, it seems strange that a race caller moved on to Melbourne High and then Melbourne University. Eric did. He was a reporter on the Melbourne Argus in 1926 when 3LO engaged him to cover racing and wrestling broadcasts. He left the ABC dramatically in 1933 amid a flurry of controversy, and the next year, 1934, saw him here. He began his outstanding 20-year career with 3DB. It wasn't only his ability as a race caller that carves his name indelibly into our history, but his versatility and the admiration for him from his peers.
Well, he was worthwhile as a race caller because it made 3DB a racing station. And, well, in those days, it was all hands to the pump. Everybody sort of went into all the programs and helped on all the jobs. They just didn't take the one job. Everybody worked together. One of the cleverest programs that DB ever ran was Information Please. And he conducted that, and he answered the questions promptly. A number of people, of course, said that he had access to the questions beforehand, but he didn't. He would memorize pages of the encyclopedia to keep his mind trained.
Maury Callard remembers Eric.
Well, he was an amazing person. There's no doubt about it. His memory was phenomenal. I remember one time I was sitting in my office and Eric came in and he was talking about something or other, and I said, look, there's one thing I admire about you, Eric. You remember things. And he said, oh, yes. He said, I'm one of those fortunate people, if you like. I've almost got a photographic memory. And I said, oh, don't be silly. He said, righto, I'll prove it to you. And I had a book in front of me, an ordinary book. So he said, open it. So I opened it and he said, see that page there? He said, I'll read it to himself, which he did. And he said, now you read it. And he said, and I read it and I put it down. And he said, you start reading it aloud to me. And I did. And he said, stop. And he went on and he read the next 5 lines. He said the next 5 lines. I thought to myself, oh, Godfather. And then over the years, I can remember his Anzac marches and all of those things. They were absolutely superb.
In both radio and television, producer Norm Spencer has seen and worked with them all.
Oh, Welsh has got to be one of the greatest. He was the doyen. Eric Welsh, before the war, he set the standard for all race callers in this country. I heard it once described, he brought culture to racing, and I thought that was a pretty good comment. But not only that, we had things like Information Please. We had all the professors and all the experts. And Eric originally was there as a sporting man, and John Stewart used to be the compere. And they go right through the whole thing, and no, they couldn't. What about you, Ed? Well, now, I can remember in 1923 such and such, and he'd be boom, right, and he had a photographic memory. And later, as I became a friend of his, I learnt he used to read the paper right through, and the whole thing would be photographed in his mind.
Here now is Eric Welsh from a broadcast of Information Please.
Eric, now that there is so much talk of famous horses, we might recall the famous Ajax, who, after 18 successive victories, was beaten. Who beat him?
Spear Chief. Ajax was 40-1 on, and Spear Chief beat him at Rose Hill in Sydney.
That's correct in all details. Thank you, and 5 shillings to the Western Australian Centre, J. Shine of Bunbury.
Admiration for Eric Welsh extended beyond Bunbury and Western Australia.
Jack Little, the late Jack Little, took a tape, not a tape, I guess it was a recording in those days, and probably an old acetate, back to the States of Eric's call of a Melbourne Cup. And they didn't believe it. They couldn't believe that this was a real thing happening. They, thought it was stooged because it was so fast. Used to and here comes Beetle Bomb, and that sort of slow pace. And I think all race callers owe, a hell of a lot to Eric.
However, Russia dashed to the front at the 2 furlongs post and went away, looking likely to open up a winning lead. Leonard is chasing him, followed by Concerto and Carey coming home at a great rate, and then Earl Mond, and on target right out in the centre of the course, but coming on the scene too late, and a furlong from home you can say that Russia has the race safely won. Carey is finishing on gamely, but far too late, and Russia strode in by a great margin. Russia first. And on target or Carey second, 4th is Leonard, followed then by Prince Standard, Knockalo, Chef Pledgetta, followed by first in Gallant Gentleman, 2 Grand Spam, Oatcake, Punctiliar, Proctor, and at the head of the others is Cordale, the favourite, and then coming Miss Prim and Flying Duke, and the last to finish were Logical, Sthenelaus, Sherry Marie, Queen Midas, and Rubontine and Magnificent and Chief Pilot. They all seemed to get the stitch and were pulled up very shortly after passing the post. Number 1, Russia, D. Monroe, was the winner of the Melbourne Cup.
One of those race callers referred to by Jeff Cork as owing Eric Welsh a lot is our own Bill Collins, who readily admits it.
Well, filling his shoes was very, very difficult and very awesome to me, because he was a legend to me before I met him, and I found him to be a great person. For a start off, Eric Welsh had the best voice that I've ever heard anywhere. And I'm not talking about broadcasting races. I'm talking about doing programs like Reflections in a Wine Glass and Information Please and these sort of things. It was the most magnificent voice. He was a very, very clever man. Apart from broadcasting his races, he was able to do all these programs. And his general knowledge for a show like Information Please was, quite outstanding. It was really remarkable. He was an easy man to get along with, loved his beer and his cigarette, was one of the boys, loved to tell stories, of experiences that had gone past, and really made you feel at home.
Sad to say, Eric's great talent wasn't recognised in financial terms. Dan Webb.
Later on, I found out that Eric Welsh had been asking for 9 years for an increase and had failed to get it. And when Eric went down to Mornington and bought his pub, the story was that the chairman of the Herald said, "Look, Eric, stay with us. You can write your own ticket. It's just that your applications for money have been forgotten or overlooked." He was the greatest broadcaster Australia's ever known.
The greatest broadcaster ever known, as described then by Dan Webb, died on the 25th of July 1983 at the age of 82. He leaves behind him memories of a great race caller, some say the best ever, a man with that unbelievable memory we've talked about, a commentator who brought the annual Anzac Day parades into our homes via radio and television for over 20 years, and memories of Friday and Saturday nights at the boxing and wrestling, describing everything he saw so vividly that we really believed we were there. Dan Webb knew Eric in both his great years and his last years.
Eric Welsh was like a father to me because, you see, I'd come out here from England and I had no father. Eric Welsh was a fantastic man. He had worldly wisdom. He'd had an unhappy marriage. So as a youngster who was involved in certain flirtations in those days, he could give me advice. He was so knowledgeable about everything. It wasn't just sport. He knew about music, he knew about politics, he knew about geography. He had a fantastic brain. And, you know, I saw Eric right up till months before he died. He used to visit him down at Mount Martha, where he was in the nursing home there. I was broken-hearted, Bert, when I saw him. He was reduced to a guy who slobbered and knew that he slobbered, and it was just so sad because he had such pride, such a fantastic man. I took him once across to the Hastings pub, and he had friends over there, old jockeys and racecourse people, you know. And, you know, they all stood up to a man when I walked into the pub, and they applauded him. And the old boy was hanging onto my arm, and he said, "Give us a chair, Dan, I can't stand up anymore." He's a great bloke, Eric Welsh.